All right, I've created a new project and I called it Image Sample. And unfortunately, without thinking too much, I updated my copy of Android Studio. And so I've got a new thing here that got created automatically when I created my project. The contact main and then the activity content. And if you look inside these two, they're kind of linked together. Notice how this one links to somewhere it should have a content main. These two somehow link together. So if you update Android Studio, you might have extra stuff here, but the main stuff that we're going to be messing with is still inside activity main. And here, what's inside content? Oh, that is content main. What's in activity main? Here's activity main. It's got a bunch of stuff in it, including toolbars that I'm not using and a link to content main. So I take that back. If you're using the older version of version of Android Studio, you'll see just activity main. What this new version does is it brings in a bunch of complicated stuff, including content main. And so this is what you're probably seeing to some extent in your activity main. We'll be able to keep it straight. My advice, do not update Android Studio in the midst of this class. If you want to we did that in the iOS class and it caused more headaches than it was worth. Here's an example. Okay, where it's just linking this main content, which is kind of the stuff we've been creating all along, linking it into main, and then main's got a whole bunch of other stuff in it that we don't necessarily need. But that doesn't mean that we can't use it this way. But remember, if you have updated that content main has got the main content of your screen. So we could mess around with that a little bit. Okay, what I want to talk about today is primarily images and how to use them inside your Android projects and how to manipulate them. I don't know how long this is going to take. I've been working on it for 3.5 hours, which means the lecture should take about 15 minutes. Hopefully a little bit longer than that. So let's go over to the notes. If you've got the old version of the Unit 5, and again, they're a little bit confusing because this is linked at Unit 6. I'm going to change that after class. But in Unit 5, debugging text files and images, I'm going to start with the images. And we did our image, I call it image sample versus image test, shouldn't make any difference. What we're going to be doing is learning how to use image resources. Your image resources are hiding inside your resources folder. In order for your project to have images in it, the images have to be available unless you're reading them from an external file like your photo library. That's beyond the scope of this class. And before I modified the notes, it also said you can go to the web and steal images from there. Well, I don't want to do that either, because what happens if you have no internet connection and your pictures don't show up? So what we're going to do, very similar to what we did in Visual Studio, is embed the images inside the project. What happens if you got bazillions of images? Well, I hope you got bazillions of bytes of space on the device, because all those images are going to be stored inside. You should be sizing these images appropriately for your application. If your screen that you're designing this for, we're still designing for phones. If your phone is only 3 inches wide, let's say 1,000 pixels wide, it makes no sense to put a 2,000 width pixel picture in there because you won't be able to view it. Unless you anticipate putting this on a big 10-inch tablet. Then maybe it does. So just like in Visual Studio, it does make sense to resize your images because they take up room in your application. If they take up room in your application, they take up room on your device. And most of you know when you're buying your devices, you're buying them with a limited amount of memory, 32 gig, 64 gig, maybe today 128 gig. And if you got tons and tons of photos and your app is a 1 gig app, heaven forbid, because you got all these big, huge pictures in there, nobody's going to download and use it. So try when you're using these images to make them the right size. In a minute here, I'm going to talk about the different sizes. One of the things that took me by surprise, and this is why it took 3 hours to figure out this lecture today, is that some of the images are now stored in this new folder that wasn't there the last time I taught the class, and that's the MIPMAP folder. What the MIPMAP folder allows you to do, if I understand it properly, is create images in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sizes with 5 different resolutions for different devices. So if you're using a very high resolution device, some of the latest Galaxy phones or the Galaxy tablets, if you're using a high resolution device, then you want a high pixel, high count image stored as your XXX HDPI. Remember, DPI is device independent pixels. You want a very high resolution picture in here. I tried it when I was playing around with it, and I put the same picture in here and in here and in here and in here and in here. And when I used this one, it came up about postage stamp size, because it took the pixels that were in there and adjusted them to the resolution of the screen, and it made it itty bitty. It's just like your icons on your desktop and Windows. If you're running that on a very high resolution screen, the icons are huge. But then if you put it on a low res screen, I'm sorry, the other way around. If you get a low res screen, the icons are huge. Everything is huge. But then if you go to a very high resolution 32-inch monitor, the icon for my computer is about that big and you can barely see it unless you resize it. So we can do this, and we will do a little bit of this here. But most of my pictures I put in the drawable folder, unless I'm starting to write applications for multiple devices. Then maybe they go down here with different sizes for the different devices. When you have different icons and different pictures and different sizes for different devices, the Android device you're running this on automatically picks the appropriate picture for the resolution that it has. The device knows whether it's an HDPI or a XXX HDPI device. By the way, 2 years ago when I taught this class, there was no XXX. So the technology keeps moving. So the device picks the appropriate one. You need to make sure they're appropriate size. I'd put one in here and hope that it works. For right now, we just want to bring them in. Using multiple shouldn't cause a lot of problems. All right, we need some pictures to play with. So let's go find some pictures. If you're following along, let's go to my website. And if you go to my home page, there's a lovely picture of me. I'm sure you would like to use that in your app, at least in the sample app right now. So let's steal that picture. You right click it and save the image as a file. We can't just copy it in, we have to save it as a file. Save the image. Android Studio will work with either a JPEG file or a PNG file. It works with both. Remember the difference between the two. JPEG files can't have transparent backgrounds. So if you want to put images into your apps that have transparent backgrounds, you're going to have to suck these JPEGs into your favorite drawing program. My favorite is paint.net. Remove the background, save it as a PNG file, and then import it. I'm not worried about the background here, so JPEG is fine. I'm going to put it on my desktop so it's easy to find, hopefully, and save that one. Now, a little later in my notes, I have some tips in here, and here, by the way, are the resolutions for all those different types. There used to be an LDPI for low, meaning very low resolution, that had 36 by 36. They don't even show up anymore. So we don't expect too many of those devices to be out there anymore. And here's the new one that stores images in 192 by 192 pixels. What we're first going to take a look at is application icons. When the user installs your program on their device, what icon appears on their desktop, on their main swipe screen? If you don't do anything, you get the green little Android logo. But you can pick your own. So we're going to learn to do that first. It's relatively simple. And those icons, depending on the resolution of the device, need to come in 5 different flavors so the icon appears at approximately the same size on every one of those devices. So what we need to do if we're going to use my photo as the icon for our app is we need to resize it 5 different times. Whoa, that would be annoying. The good news is that Android Studio now comes with a tool where you give it any picture and it will automatically generate these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 icons for you. It'll automatically resize the picture that you give it by stretching it, by cropping it, by doing whatever to those appropriate sizes and automatically create 5 different icons for you. Very handy. To make this the most effective, your image ought to be the maximum resolution that we use for icons, which is 192 by 192. Now, the picture of me that we just downloaded, I don't know what the size it is. I can guarantee it's not 192 by 192. It'll get a little cropped, it'll get a little chopped off, but this application that we're using is very functional. To demonstrate probably the better way to do this, I want to go to Google Images. So go to google.com. And then I want to do an image search. I'm going to click on images up here. And I want to do a search. Let's get in the spirit of the season here for Halloween. All kinds of cool things. But what I really want is one that's exactly the right size for an app icon in Android, which we know, at least today, someday it'll probably be 256 by 256. I think in the iOS world right now, they're at 512 by 512 for app icons. You can make them that huge. What do they need them that big for? The website. And the website where you download or look up the app is supposed to have the app icon on it, and 512 by 512 gives you a nice big one for the web. So we're looking for Android right now, we're limited to 192. So we're looking for pictures that are 192 by 192, and just touching them you can see how big they are, but finding just the ones you want would be annoying. Good news is there are search tools and we can select a size of exactly 192 by 192. And now I get all kinds of cool pictures that are just right. Now remember one thing, that if you get some of these like this one, that would be a very poor choice, because when it gets shrunk down to what was the minimum size that was listed in my notes, different page here. When it gets shrunk down from 192 to 192 by 48 by 48, the resolution of that picture particularly is going to be pretty funky. So you want to pick something that's fairly, this one's not going to be too good, that's fairly easy, it might size pretty well. So let's see, which ones do I like here? I'm not sure how well that one's going to size, but this one will be interesting, right? Nice and plain. Should size very, very well, but I'm going to be brave, and I like this one, so I'm going to use it even though it might not size too appropriately. To steal this, you got to be careful if you haven't used Google Images. Click it, and this is the actual image itself. Actually, pardon me?
Go to view image.
You do view image, it's probably the same size. Right click it and save this image. And I'll call this my pumpkin icon. It'll be interesting to see what extension it gets because I'm using a Mac. If you're on Windows, you usually get a choice. Here I might be stuck with whatever it already is. Hopefully I can still use it. Let's find out. I went to my desktop. And here's my pumpkin icon. I probably should have put that extension on there. Can I rename it? Maybe I should just download it again.
Might be just rename it and add it to it.
Yeah, let's do it this way. Save the image as, oh, there's the JPEG. I stripped it off. My bad. if you can't remember the extension, this is the easiest thing to do. As Harold said, I could have renamed that file and just put the JPEG extension on it, but that's assuming that it was a JPEG when I started. In this case, it was. All right, so we got a couple of pictures there. Now there's one more that I want to get, just look around, this time not for 192 size. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to take out my size limits and say any size. Actually, I think I'm going to go to medium. So I'm going back to search tools, size, medium. I'm looking for something around 500 by 500. This one's not too bad. And relatively square. I think I used this one even though it's a little too big. Let's see what happens if we use that one. So I'm going to download this one, click it, and there what looks like the actual image, but if I view the image, it's even bigger than that. That's pretty big for my phone. Now the good news is this is still 700 pixels. Supposedly my phone's, or I think it's my Nexus 7, has got 1,000 pixels across. How do we know? Can look at the emulator. But I'll use this one, we'll see what happens. Save the image as Halloween PNG. So now we got a few images to play with. Yes, you can use your own images. You can take pictures and put them into your drawing program and crop them and just get Kevin's head if that's what we want and use that as an icon. It's another good Halloween scary picture. But you can use your own images. There's no limits here. But again, as you resize these and turn them into icons or put them on a phone, you want to make sure they look okay. And you don't want them to be terribly huge, because if the phone is resizing this thing a whole bunch, you're wasting memory. On the other hand, if you're also going to look at the same picture on my Nexus 7 or on a Galaxy 10 tablet, it may be just the right size. So you have to experiment with that on different devices. So any picture will do. You can take screen snapshots. So if you like the butterfly, you could probably steal it, but you could also take a screen snapshot and use that. Any of your image manipulation skills should come in handy here. All right, we've got them. Now, how do we bring them in? Going back to my app now. I found, again, that there's a built-in tool to help you do application icons. The easiest way I found to do it is to point to the resources folder, the res folder, right-click, and choose New, Image Asset. Image assets, at least from the reading I've done so far, are defined as images that you might use for this icon for the app. By the way, that's called the IC launcher, the icon for launching. But it can also be used to get images for toolbars and menus and stuff. So if you want little icons next to those, you can use the image asset as well. Click on image asset. It will launch this image asset application. It's a little mini app. I think in my notes I called it a dialog. Notice here's the little green Android guy who comes in many different sizes. Supposedly, if you take this big guy and put it on a XXX HD device, it'll appear at approximately that same size. They all appear, if you put them on the devices next to each other, they should all appear about the same size. This one's much bigger, but the pixels on those new devices are much smaller, and so they shrink it down a little bit. So that's why we have all these different sizes. And the good news is that this little app builds all 5 of these sizes for us. Let's take a quick look. I'm not going to spend too much time here at the clip art option. And notice there's a clip art version of our little Android guy. And if you wish, you can click the choose button, and there's a bunch of icons here. Now, obviously, there looks like, I don't know, I didn't count 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 80 of them here. If everybody used these for their apps, then we'd run out of icons real fast, right? And the icons for apps would be very, very boring. I think most of these are designed to be used as menu icons. But if you're lazy and you don't want to go find a decent picture someplace that's 192 by 192, you could use one of these. So I'm going to use, and on my Surface I could hardly tell what these things were. Somewhere there was a globe, I thought. At least I
Down
can't.
left,
Where?
down,
Down.
down,
Down.
down, 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 down. Stop, right, right, right.
Okay. It's kind of a map. It's a little different than the one I had. But if you want, you can turn it into a circle and crop it circularly, or you can make it a square and make it fit with rounded edges. You can change its colors. There's all the dark greens. That's
You
very,
gotta
very
change
lit.
the black on the side.
There we go. Now it's green, and if I want to change the background color to Packer colors, I can do that. And you can create icons using that. Not too bad. What you don't want to do is change the IC launcher name. And this is something that's actually consistent between the Android system and the iOS system. The launcher icon has a fixed name that you can't change. Also note that the name is all lowercase. A little later, we're going to be putting our own resources into these files, our own pictures. The file names have to be all lowercase. So we downloaded Halloween, we downloaded Voker, or whatever we called that picture. If they don't have a lowercase name, we're going to have to rename them so that they have all lowercase names. It's just a rule for the Android resources that they're all lowercase. Now that's not really the one I want. So let's go get an image. With the image, you can click the dots and go find it. Notice that everything else is pretty much the same. We can crop or center or square. We can change the background color. Actually, I don't want a background color, so can I cancel it? No. Should I make it white? Probably.
Click in the middle. The middle of the palette.
Yeah, but I'm not going to be right on, so let's see if I do F, F, F 3 times. Do you like that? There we go. Fully saturated. Remember, F in hexadecimal means that's the maximum character, right? Hexadecimal. 6 Fs would be fully red, fully blue, fully green, completely washed out with color. That's why it becomes white. Versus 000, which is no color, which is black. The shortcut is 3 Fs. If you only give it 3 letters, it assumes each one is a pair that is duplicated. Little tricks and tips that you might be learning in HTML as well. Okay, so let's go find our pictures. They should be on the desktop. And if I'm using my Voker picture here, it's got a capital V in it. Doesn't matter. Because we're ultimately going to name it IC Launcher anyways. So what it is initially doesn't matter in this case. But a little bit later, when we bring this Voker picture in to use on our screen instead of as an icon, we're going to have to rename it because that capital V, I'm pretty sure, is going to cause trouble. So this is the one I want. Choose it, brings it in, and there. Now you got icons. And notice when you get here, things start getting a little hard to read and hard to see. And that's what you got to consider when you grab these icons off the web. If they're very, very complicated, by the time you shrink it down to the MDPI size here, you might not be able to recognize the bats from the birds and the witches. But now we have these icons, and I can make them again circular, not too bad, vertical, puts a little stuff on the side. You can add padding if you want some space around the outside. So you can mess with them all you want. I like that circular better. Now when you're done, you simply click on Next. You get a warning, a bunch of red ones saying, the ones with red, I'm going to replace them. Well, that's what I'm here for. I want to get rid of the Android icon and replace it with my own. So yeah, go ahead and do that. Well, how do we know if it worked? Easy. Pick one of these and double click it. And you get to see it. Notice they all look a little bit sick, but if you look closely, the resolution on this Voker is a little blurry. Versus here, he's still relatively sharp. So each one of those is designed for a higher resolution device. They should all look pretty good depending on the device you're using. So what else do we have to change? Nothing. This is now the icon that appears on the desktop when you install this app. And I believe when I went to my main content, if I go back to design view here, this was supposed to change. I think I might have to close my project and open it again for that icon launcher to change that little guy right there. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a file, close the project, and then open it right back up again. Please. There it comes. And you can kind of see it, but there's my picture in its place. And the other place it's supposed to show up, and this is where I need your help, don't follow, is when you launch it. And my luck is it'll work here because it didn't work on my Windows machine. There's my hello world, but notice it doesn't show up here. Don't know why. And notice these are still showing up. I'm not sure why. This again is the new feature of this new version of everything, and I'm not real happy with it. But what should happen is when you click on the dot, that gets you back to the home screen, and you should see your icon. I might have to delete this one, but what's interesting is it's here. On my Windows machine, and this isn't the same icon, is it? That's sample one.
Go to your launch pad, not in Mac, but in your Android.
Here?
Yeah, there it is.
There it is. Okay, that's what's wrong. Why isn't it going to the desktop? Because when you install the old version of the emulators, when you ran it, it automatically put it on your desktop. Now you have to use it like an actual device, and I don't know if we can right click on it or hold it. There we go. And now I can launch it. That's what I was missing. Thank you, Harold. Bonus points. Come to my office after the lecture and get a candy bar because I couldn't figure that out. But he's right. It's in the if you actually want to see it, it's going to be in, he called it the launch pad, but really it's just all your apps. Here they are. And there's the one I just created. So it did change my launch icon. From now on, that's a requirement for all your projects starting with Lab 5. And starting with Lab 5 is to have a launcher icon instead of this little application green guy here. To get rid of any of these, to uninstall them, I think you have to hold them. Actually, no, I take it back. There is a settings feature that allows you to delete them if you really care.
Get them off your desktop? The home screen?
There's a device settings, and this is just teaching you how to use an Android device, and I don't think that's necessary. I'm in developer, that's not where I want to be. So that's the developer options.
Swipe it up. Can you
There's the settings.
go?
Inside of settings, there's an apps.
Oh, yeah.
And then inside of apps, you can find whatever apps you want. I'm scrolling with my mouse, and that's not going to work. But there's the image sample, there's my application, and at this point, I think we can select it and uninstall it. Not easy, but I think that's by design. Realistically, in the Android devices, you build an app, you want to get rid of it, you got to go into the settings to get rid of it. Just keep piling them in here would be my advice. The good news is if I change this and run it again, it will replace the app. It will not put a new one out there, so I won't have 60 of these Volcker icons. It keeps replacing the existing one. Any questions about that launch icon? That seems to be the easiest way to change that. I did find one Stack Overflow that pointed me to a website that does exactly the same thing. It looks like they've translated that Android Studio app into a web app, and it's almost picture for picture, button for button, exactly the same thing. They might have a few different icons in there or clip art in there, I don't know. But to me, it doesn't make sense to use a web app to create these files and then have to copy the files over into your project, and nah, much easier to do it from within Android Studio itself. Let's change our app icon and see that it actually changes it on the screen. So now I want to go through that process again. And the way I went through the process is I right-clicked on the res file, did a new image asset. That's interesting.
Don't have the old one in
I'm curious.
there. Cancel.
Hmm.
That's still good.
Okay. Minor little glitch there, I would say. I want to do a new image asset, and this time I'm going to go find that pumpkin that I downloaded. There's my pumpkin JPEG. Choose it. And it still looks pretty good here, but you can see that some of those bats, the smaller ones, are just turning into dots, but it still looks pretty good. So I'm going to say next, and I'm going to replace it. There it goes. Notice it's already placed it here because I had my, I don't know if it was the HDPI, whichever one I opened is already sitting here, and it changed it on me right away. I'm going to rerun my program.
Wish Android Studio would just know to run it on any open emulators.
You can. Now I'm going to go back and see if it changed it on the desktop. Sure did. So you can continue to change them, but there is no way to have more than one. Well, I take that back. There might be. There's no way to use this technique to have more than one. There might be a way to change that image launcher so when your app launches, it says, hey, Halloween's coming. So my icon's going to be Kevin's face with Halloween around it or something. And then later on for Thanksgiving, there'll be turkey gob, you'll have beard and everything. And then for Christmas, there might be a way to do that, but that's a little beyond the scope. It's like changing the icon of your Windows app on the fly. Why would you do that? Probably not too often. All right. Any questions again about that launcher? Not too hard. I believe my notes are up to date and talk about it. I do have some tips that are down here a little bit later. Where did the tips go? Find 192 by 192 pixel or pixel picture. If you start with a 58 by 58 and then you make it 192, then it really becomes pixelated and it gets really funky looking. So you want to start with the highest resolution and then shrink it. It usually works better than to take a low resolution and try to make it bigger because it gets fuzzy. Google search. You can also edit other pictures, make them 192 by 192. That works fine using paint.net. Save them and then bring them in. So this describes how to bring those guys in, how to use the clip art.
So they have to be .png files?
No, I recommend it because you can make them transparent. So if that pumpkin didn't have all that dark clouds behind it and you wanted to make it actually shine through, you have your icon show through so that you can see the background on it. Then you want to be a PNG file. A JPEG file cannot have a transparent background. With my picture, when I turned it into a circle, remember we looked at it and it had these little gray boxes around the outside. That usually represents transparency. And my round circle with my head on it actually showed through, and you could see the background on the screen. So here's how to do what we just did, and there's the tips. All right, tell you what, this is a halfway decent place to take a break, so let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about how to use pictures actually on the screen.